Welcome back to With the Greatest Respect. Our next guest is Ian Michael Chappell. I first met Ian, my childhood hero, when I was a young boy, and we've remained close friends ever since. I see Ian Chappell through a biased lens, but it's a lens that has been true and clear. Ian is a loyal, honest and a once-in-a-generation leader who has given so much to so many. Whether it be his daring, aggressive and attacking leadership as Australian cricket captain, or his knowledgeable, stimulating and engaging sports journalism, he has entertained us for many years. Enjoy this chat with the great Ian Chappell. Ian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David.
Great to have a chat with you this afternoon, and I'm going to start. And we've known each other a long time. I was adding it up the other day. It's from when I think I was about 8 or 9 years of age, and so I've got to know your values and principles that have guided your life over the years, and maybe start there. And because you are a very loyal person, a person that is also runs their life on loyalty and honesty, sometimes brutal. You want to talk a bit about some of those principles and values which I think would be a really good start for the listeners.
Yeah, well, a lot of it, I've always said that you get some lucky breaks in life, and probably the most important ones are, firstly, your parents, and secondly, the education you get, and then probably thirdly, your life partner and your friends. So a lot of my values come from my parents. I've often said that I'm more Richardson than Chappell. There's a lot of gene in me, and I'm finding it more every day. I'm getting more impatient every day, which is definitely a gene trait. People, when I was captain of Australia, a couple of board members said to me, Jesus, you're difficult to deal with, which I didn't think I ever was. I always felt that, I was pretty straightforward. You knew where I was coming from. If I was pissed off with something, you knew about it. And if I was happy with something, you knew about that. But anyhow, they said, oh, you're bloody difficult to deal with. And I said, you're lucky. What do you mean? I said, well, you've got to deal with me. You don't have to deal with my mother. You'd really find out, because Jean had plenty of opinions and she was quite prepared to state them. I think also from Jean I got a good understanding of money and where it stands in your life. Obviously, you realise that you need some money to live your life. I just sort of half jokingly, I've said, long as you got enough for a roof over your head, a feed and a schooner, you're going all right. But, money has never ruled my life. And that definitely comes from Jean. And I think also my feeling of justice, I get really cranky if I think a group or a person is not being treated as they should be. That definitely comes from Jean. On the sporting side, Martin taught us some very important lessons. I remember I was 11, I would have been 11. It was my last year at St Leonard's Primary School, and that was the first year we'd had baseball at the school. And because Martin was a Claxton Shield baseballer, and so we'd always had gloves and balls around the house, and we were always throwing and catching and so on. And the kids in the cricket team, the St Leonard's cricket team, used to come to our house, play cricket, and then in the winter, we'd have a throw and a hit and so on with them. So they obviously had a bit of hand-eye coordination to play cricket. So we thought we were a pretty decent baseball team, and we won the Glenelg comp easily, undefeated. So now, having won that, we've got to go and play the winners they put into the winners from all the other comps. And the first game we played was against Unley Primary School. And they'd been playing together for 3 or 4 years, and they were a proper good side. and they belted us. And so here we are. We've lost the game. I'm sitting on the bench, and I'm probably bawling. And Martin comes up and says, you take your team over there and you say, well played to the opposition. And I said, no, piss off. They beat us. I'm not going over there, And he grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, picked me up, and he said, you take your team over there and you shake them all by the hands and say, well played. And so, I've got to go over there and make it look like I haven't been crying and shake hands with them. But it was a really good lesson. And I realised later on, when I was captain of Australia, I always used to say to our guys, I want you to hang around for an hour after the day's play. I don't care what you drink whatever you want, but I want you to hang around. And that included going into the opposition dressing room. And I discovered after a while that when you got beaten and you went into the opposition dressing room and shook them all by the hand and so on, I sort of saw it, the reverse situation, when some teams would come into our dressing room after we'd beaten them and they'd shake hands and so on, and you'd think to yourself, we might have beaten this mob, but they haven't gone away. They'll be back. Whereas another team, you'd beat them and you wouldn't see them in the dressing room and you'd think, we've got this mob, So it not only became the right thing to do, but I think it became a good psychological ploy as well. It was...
Did you learn more about your opposition?
Yeah, you do. And, you walk through the door and the opposition are looking at you. What are these bastards doing coming in here? We've just beaten them, So, and I was never in any doubt that if I'd have cheated on the cricket field and Martin was there, or if any of us had cheated on the cricket field, that Martin, even if it was a test match, Martin would have walked out on the ground and grabbed me again by the scruff of the neck and dragged me off and said, you're not going back out there until you can behave properly. So, you hear of some of the parenting of sports people, and it's horrendous. So again, that was a very lucky break, the parents we got.
So I want to talk to you a bit more about, Martin and Jean, because you and Greg have talked to me a lot about, and they sound like two remarkable and beautiful people. But Martin must have been a seriously good cricket coach too, to be fair.
Yeah, Greg gives him more credit than I do. Or no, perhaps I'll put it another way. Greg gives Lynn Fuller less credit than I do.
Right. So Lynn Fuller was a family friend of Martin's, right?
Well, I was 5 years of age. Martin was playing at the Unley Oval. We'd just gone to Glenelg. So he was in the B grade team because he'd come from Kensington and Glenelg hadn't seen much of him, so they picked him in the B grade side. And I'll never forget, Martin said, come with me. And we walked up the back of the stand at Unley Oval, and he introduced me to Mr. Fuller, as he was to me then. And he said, Lynn, I want to get Ian coached. When would be a good time to start? And Lynn said, how old is he? And Martin said, he's 5. He said, bring him around next Sunday. So from the age of 5 to 17, probably, every Sunday, and it was more than the summer, it was sort of probably started September and went right through to April. And he had a backyard pitch, 11 yards of turf and 11 yards of grass. And Lynn would bowl for an hour, and he was an older guy then. I don't know what age he was, and he could bowl very, very accurate seamers. And he taught me the defence, and I'll never forget, what he said to me at first up, you've got to learn defence because all your shots are based on defence. He said, yep. Your drives are just a continuation of a forward defensive shot. Drives off the back foot, same thing. And the interesting thing was, before that, when Martin would throw balls to me in the backyard, I'd block a couple as he had told me to, and then I'd whoomp, because I wanted to get the thrill of whacking one over the fence or something like that, and get your head down, hit the ball on the ground, right? And I'd hit 2 or 3 more on the ground, then boom, off I'd go. But with Lynn, I never hit the ball in the air. There was just something about his aura that I didn't want to defy him. Dad, that was different. You always defy your father, but it was a really good combination because I don't know, probably 8 or 9 years of age, something like that. I finished, and they were usually about an hour session with Lynn. I was coming out of the net, and Martin said, "Go back in the net." And he sent me back in there. He said, "It's fine to learn how to stay in, but you've got to score runs." And he would then throw me an assortment of, half volleys and full tosses. And then sometime after that, I don't know, probably when I was about 9 or 10. So Martin was a Claxton Shield baseballer, and he was a catcher. So he had a good arm and an accurate arm, importantly. And the pitch at Lynn Fuller's, at that halfway mark, it had a rise because he'd kept top dressing it with turf. So the pitch was actually higher than the grass. So it had this nice ridge at the halfway mark. And again, Martin said, "Go back in the nets," and I go back in the nets. And I don't ever remember any conversation about duck or bob or weave. It was just, here they come, you defend yourself. And that's where I learnt to pull and cut and hook off the ridge. And as a kid, see, I went from, well, like in the schoolboys team at Glenelg, which they used to play in the school holidays. So we'd play 11, 12 games in the December holidays. And I got in that team at 12, and it was under 16. So I'm playing against older kids at that stage. Then I go to Prince Alfred College, and Prince Alfred College were in the second grade competition in Adelaide. And so I played in the under 13s, and then I went straight into the first. So at 13, 14 years of age, suddenly I'm playing against men. And I mean, that was a terrific part of my development, and a very important part. But because I was small and playing against older guys, I didn't really have the power. I could hit a cover drive, but I couldn't get many runs off it. Whereas, from the pull shot, I could get a bit of, and so I could hit the.
I wanted to talk to you about your technique, because your technique was really interesting to me, because you had this move back and across, which gave you room, and you positioned yourself very well for shot square of the wicket. Can you talk to me about why? Was that Lynn Fuller that gave you that idea or was that something you evolved yourself? Because it was a clear strategy. It looked from the outside as to how you were going to play particularly quick bowling.
Yeah, well, it was the technique of the day. I remember Lynn saying to me, back and across is your first movement. And, it was only, people think that I made a huge movement, but I didn't. It was two movements, actually. I'd go back and across, and then if the guy banged it in short, then I'd go back again. But, it was only a very light touch, the first one. And so if you didn't look really closely, you'd think it was just one movement. Yep. But Lynn said Bradman went back and across. So he said, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for you. Righto. And then I played with Gary Sobers for 3 seasons in the South Australian side, and he went back and across. And I'll never forget during the 70-71 series, we're in Perth, and I've gone to the Travelodge in Perth, and we were staying down at Scarborough. So it was a bit of a hike back to Scarborough. Anyhow, I'm in the room with Keith Miller, Lindsay Hassett, and Alan McGilvray. So I'm not going home early when I've got a chance to talk, well, particularly the first two. I'm not so bothered about McGilvray. The only bloke telling me how to bat in that room was the guy who hadn't played Test cricket. And McGilvray says, "Chappell, you've got to get on the front foot and drive snow." And I said, "Well, it's a bit bloody difficult, Matt, because he's up under my bloody armpit all the time." "No, you've got to get on the front foot and drive him." I said, "Well, are you listening, Matt? Bloody hard to drive from up under your armpit. This back and across shit," he said, you've got to get rid of that." And I said, "Well, Mac, it was good enough for Bradman and good enough for Sobers. On that basis, it's good enough for me." And that still didn't convince him. And then he went on again. And I said, now I understand what you mean. I've got to get on the front foot and drive the ball over the wicketkeeper's head. Don't be facetious, boy. And so, that was a thing that, started with Lynn, the back and across thing. And then Gary, I mean, everybody knows Gary is the best cricketer of all time, and by a wide margin. But what a lot of people don't know is two things. He's a champion bloke as well, but he also understands the game of cricket. Sometimes you get guys who are really good, like Sobers, and you talk to them about the game. How do you do? Oh, you just do it, mate. You just see the ball and you back it, you belt it, you know. But Gary knew how it all happened. And the thing that I'll never forget about Gary was, as an 18-year-old, I'm an 18-year-old nobody from Glenelg, and he's the best cricketer in the world. And Ian Chappell gave me a bit of trouble early on. And I went to him one day and I said, Sobe, I've obviously got a bit of a problem. Have you got any suggestions? And he said, go and get a bottle of beer, son, and we'll talk about it. And he told me three things in that conversation, and I did them for the rest of my career. And one of them was, he said, because you make that movement back and across, as I do, he said, I stand outside my crease to the quickies. And he said, I think you'd be better off doing that, which I did from then on. And he said, what guard do you take? And I said, centre. And he said, well, because you're going back and across, you're probably better off to take leg stump guard, and you'll know better where your off stump is, and just as importantly, where your leg stump is. So I took leg stump guard from then on. I can't remember now what the third thing was he told me. But, yeah, as I say, champion bloke, treated me like an equal, which I really appreciated. But he understood the game. He knew, and the same with bowling. He knew how it all happened.
And a seriously good player. And we're going to get back to Sobers in a moment. Can I ask about your cricketing heroes, Ian? We all had them. Did you? You spoke about Sobers, but when you were growing up, did you have cricketers that you might have modelled yourself on, or you looked up to? I know you've got an affection for Keith Miller, but who are your cricketing heroes?
Well, Keith, and I didn't have any choice, because we'd go to the Adelaide Oval whenever it was New South Wales or Australia, and I'd sit down next to Martin and he'd say, watch Miller, watch what Miller does. And I mean, not only Martin, everybody in Australia, and I'm talking not just the males, females as well, everybody idolised Keith. He was that sort of person. So it was very much watch Miller. As a kid in the backyard, I could do all the actions, all the bowling actions. I could do Miller, I could do Lindwall, even Statham and Tyson. I could do, pretty well all the guys who I'd seen at the Adelaide Oval. I could mimic their actions. And I think for a long time, I didn't really have an action of my own because I was too busy mimicking these guys. But Miller was my cricketing idol. And one of the great things in life is, and I'm sure there've been plenty of people who have been disappointed when they've actually got the chance to meet their idol later in life, and it's been a disappointment to them. That was never the case with me. I had some great times with Miller, and he's another one who understood the game. I used to, in fact, I even said it to him once, I think. I said, mate, I'm embarrassed that I captained Australia and you didn't, because I used to love talking cricket with him, and he understood the game. And Richie always said he was the best captain never to captain Australia. But it was, as I say, I felt embarrassed at times that I'd captained Australia and he hadn't. So Keith was it, really. But because of Martin, I was always watching what guys did. And Martin would always pick out aggressive players to tell me to watch. I remember when Johnny Martin came to South Australia for one season, and the little favourite was a jack in the box in the field. He was all energy in the field. And Martin said to me, watch Martin in the field, watch what he does, I'm
going to say, what about captains? Because you played under Laurie and Favell.
Again, that was mainly a watching thing, just watching and learning. Years after I'd finished playing, I read a bit more about Vic, my grandfather, Vic Richardson. Yes. And I read On Top, Down Under, which has all the captains. And I'd be reading stuff on Vic and I'd laugh and I'd think, that's where it comes from. I mean, Vic was a cop no crap captain, you can imagine what it would have been like in those days captaining South Australia, because New South Wales basically had the test side, and the ones that weren't from New South Wales were from Victoria. And so Vic had himself and basically Clary Grimmett, and then the odd guy that would come in, Nip Ballou and Tim Wall and those guys. But, he was definitely outgunned by the other two, but he never, ever took a backward step and didn't take any crap from... And there was one story in particular that always sticks in my mind, and I laughed, and I think that was the time when I thought to myself, that's where it comes from. They were playing New South Wales at the Sydney Cricket Ground, and they bowled New South Wales out late in the afternoon. So South Australia had to bat for, half an hour or something like that. And Vic was opening with Slinganitsky, who was a mate of his, you see. So as they're walking onto the ground, Tommy Andrews was the umpire. As they walk onto the ground, Vic says to Slinger, just follow me. Don't ask any questions. Just follow me. Do what I do, right? So off they go, and Vic starts walking towards fine leg. And Tommy Andrews is out in the middle, and Tommy yells out, Vic, where are you going? And Vic turned back. He said, I can hear you, Tom, but I can't see you. Where are you? And because in those days you could appeal against the light. And, I thought to myself, now I see where a lot of it came from. So with the captaincy, Vic told me, he didn't tell me a lot about cricket, but, I could tell from the family functions just, he was a great raconteur, and people would be asking him questions, and just listening to him talk was to me was energizing. And but when I became vice captain, I think he said, son, if you ever get the chance to captain, he said, if you win the toss, bat first. 9 times out of 10 you bat first. He said on the 10th occasion you think about sending them in, and then you bat first anyhow, which is not a surprising attitude from a captain who played in the uncovered pitches era. Then there was that's right, if you can't be a good cricketer, at least you can look like one. Well, I think that sort of message went over my head and landed on Greg, because he always looked immaculate as a cricketer. I don't think anybody ever said that about me. And the third thing he said was, if you get the chance to captain Australia, don't captain like a Victorian. And I'm not sure, I could never work out who he was referring to there. And I didn't ever think it was Bill. So then when I got the job as captain of Australia, I sat down. Oh, sorry, I'll go back a bit further. 58, 59 was my the year I took over as captain of the cricket team at Prince Alfred College. And obviously that was the year that Richie took over the Australian captaincy. And Richie's captaincy left a big impression on me. I really liked the enthusiasm that he brought to the team, and the aggressive, his aggressive approach, that left a big impression on me. But then when I got the job as Australian captain, I thought, right, I played under 3 captains, Les Favell for South Australia, Simpson and Bill Laurie for Australia. So I sat down and I got a bit of paper.
Was Vic still alive at this stage, Ian?
No, Vic died when I was vice captain of Australia in 1969. Yeah. And I wrote down on one side all the things I liked about the captains I played under, and on the other side, I wrote down all the things that I didn't like from the captains I'd played under. And I thought to myself, righto, well, if you like those things, probably a good idea that you do them. And if you didn't like those things, probably a good idea that you don't do them. And then the rest of it is put your own stamp on the game.
So, Ian, I wanted to talk to you about captaincy a bit later, and so that's a good segue into some things I want to ask you about, and leadership particularly. But one of the things I did want to talk to you about is your relationship with your 2 brothers.
There's 9 years between myself and Trevor. So, yeah, the backyard tests were Greg and myself. And then when I left, it was Greg and Trevor.
Got it.
and I mean, I had a huge advantage. I mean, nearly 5 years at that age is a huge difference. So I had a big advantage, and occasionally we would throw rather than bowl because it was a very short run up out in the backyard. So to get a bit of extra pace, and we'd both do it because we were both baseballers and had decent enough. And again, it was an 11-yard pitch, so it had a bit of a hump in the middle, so you could ping them onto the hump and let them fly around the other bloke's nose. But it was interesting when, Greg came into the South Australian side when I was in South Africa in 66-7. So at that point, I think I'd played probably 3 maximum club games with Greg. And then I came back, obviously, from South Africa, and the next season we played together in the South Australian team, and I was batting at 3, Greg was batting at 6. So we didn't bat together a lot, but when we did, we had a couple of mix-ups. And somebody wrote that you wouldn't know we were brothers because we had no understanding at all running between wickets. And I felt like saying to this bloke, well, mate, that's because we have no understanding because we've never played together.
You hardly played.
Yeah. And I mean, Greg was always an opponent. That's the way I looked upon him. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because if that question I asked about your cricket heroes, if I asked, and I have asked Greg that question, and he says, well, my cricket hero is my brother. And I've actually heard him say that in front of you. So all three of you are, and I don't know Trevor as well, but all three of you seem to be incredibly close, and it is a remarkable cricketing story, the Chappell family. So you obviously still see a fair bit of each other these days. So you've obviously been through an enormous amount, the three of you. Do you, are they some great memories, the relationship that you guys built with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I'd describe it as we're a close family, but we're not in each other's pocket.
Yes.
I obviously, in recent years, I've seen a lot more of Trevor than I have of Greg because Greg's been up in Brisbane. But, if ever I'm in Brisbane or he's in Sydney, we usually catch up. We certainly talk a lot on the phone. We have the occasional argument, and it's probably just as well that they are only occasional because generally when we have one, it's a pretty good one. I remember we had a huge argument when Greg was coach of Australia A, and he got Richie and I to come along to dinner with the team and just sit there, and if the guys wanted to ask any questions. And we got into a huge argument over Sheffield Shield cricket. And I was saying that it's there to be won. And Greg was saying it's there to produce cricketers for Australia. And I said, yeah, mate, but the best way to do that is try and win the Shield. If you're playing hard all the time, that's a good grounding for. So we were really, almost arguing the same point, really. Anyhow, it got pretty heated. And I thought I needed a bit of help here, you see, and because I'd said to him, mate, I laboured under a misapprehension for 16 years because I was trying to win the bastard. And so I'm struggling a bit. I think I'm probably getting the finger in the chest at this point. So I turned to Benno looking for a bit of help, you see, and Richie's having a sip of his white wine. And I said, what about you, Rich? Another sip of the white wine, the lip goes out. He said, he said, I made a mistake 9 years in a row, which only served to inflame the situation. But after we'd sort of moved away and were sort of having a drink in little groups, Merv Hughes was in the team, and Merv said to me, mate, he said, do you have many of those? I said, no, we don't have many, Merv, but when we do have one, it's usually a pretty good one. So, yeah, but we're not in each other's pocket, but I think we all know that if the shit hits the fan,
each other's backs.
One of us, the other two will be there to help them.
So I want to go into your career now, Ian, and your and Test career, and start with the first time that you made a century, which was in Melbourne. Actually, Melbourne, you might not like Melbourne, but Melbourne's been pretty kind to you. Played your first test there, first test century, and I think you might have played your last test there as well.
Yes, I did, yeah.
So it's a beautiful place, Melbourne, Ian.
The place is not so bad. The cricket ground was crap. It was a bloody awful. It was an awful place to field, because being a slip fielder, you come forward and the ball would bounce in front of you, and you come forward again, the ball would bounce. And I always said, if I'm ever going to get a busted finger, it'll be at the MCG, and it was. I had one dislocated finger my whole career, and I said, if I ever get a busted finger, it'll be at the MCG, and John Edrich will be the batsman. Bugger me, it was John Edrich.
It was.
Yeah.
By your record, it looks like when you really broke through as far as really cemented your place in the Australian Test team, or the breakout season was clearly the 68-69 series against the West Indies, which you made a couple of centuries in the series, and against very good opposition, mind you, likes of Sobers, Hall, Griffith, albeit they were sort of towards the end of their career. But was that the series that really set you up, do you think?
No, it was England 68 that made the difference. Again, we go back to Melbourne. The last Shield game of the season was in Melbourne. And I played all the tests, 67-8 against India. But apart from that 100, I hadn't done much. But I'd had a really good Shield season. And playing the last game in Melbourne, I thought to myself, you need to get runs here just to make sure that you get picked for England. So the first innings, I don't know, both innings I was going, I think I got 60 and 40. I'm not sure which way. But I holed out off Jimmy Higgs, I reckon, in the first innings at mid-wicket, just a long hop that I hit straight to mid-wicket. So I was really pissed off with myself. And then in the second innings, I ran myself out for 40. And you might remember they knocked down the stand, which was then became the Ponsford stand, which is where the change rooms were. And so for that season, we used to have to change in the old members stand, members pavilion. And you remember there was some steps, 4 or 5 steps up to a doorway right in the middle of that stand at ground level. And that's where we changed. But because it was in the member stand, we had to lock the door so that people didn't just go in there and, you couldn't trust those Victorians that had gone in and pinched all your gear. So the door had to be locked. Anyhow, I'm really pissed off with myself for running myself out. And I'm sitting on the top step because the door's locked and the 12th man hasn't come with the key. And I made a really important decision. I thought, right, you're a bloody idiot. If you get picked to go on the tour of England, you've got to relax and you've got to enjoy the tour. And I think if you do that, you'll play better. And because before I got the 100 in Melbourne in that test, we'd practiced the day before the test match. And when we came in at lunchtime, I said to the room, anybody want to bowl after lunch? And Barry Jarman, who was the vice captain and obviously knew me well from South Australia, he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to have another hit after lunch. He said, the last thing you need is another hit. You're coming with me. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to the Carlton United Brewery and you're coming with me. So we went to the brewery, but it was a good lesson because there are times when you need to just get away from it and just do something else. I'm not suggesting you should always go to a brewery, but, go play golf, do something else anyhow, get your mind away from cricket. So that's sort of, I think that prompted my decision on the steps there to say, right, you've got to relax. And it's interesting. Doug Walters was starting from a very high base when we went to England. I mean, I don't know what Doug's test average was when we went to England in 68, but it was probably in the 70s. It was very high. And mine was nothing. And anyhow, we go on that tour. And when I came back, everybody said what a great tour I'd had and what a dud tour Doug had had. I made 341 in the series. Doug made 338. So it's an interesting, you've got to put things in context. So the business, I always laugh when people say, oh, Doug couldn't play in England. He could. He just didn't make 100 in England.
Ian, I'd love you to tell the story about this series in India, 69, and then you go to South Africa straight afterwards, because I think you referenced this before, that whole thing certainly might have lit a fire underneath the players about how badly they were being treated. Can you tell the story about how bad that India trip was as far as the conditions, and then what you had to endure when you went to South Africa?
It really started, or for me, the first time I really noticed anything was 68, right at the end of that tour of England. Bob Cowper was somebody I really looked up to for his cricket knowledge, and if I wanted to talk about the mental side of batting, I would seek Bob out and chat to him. And Bob, I didn't know it at the time, but obviously he was about to retire. When he got back to Australia, he retired and went into business and was very, very successful. Anyhow, you always have an end of tour dinner so this night at the Waldorf, we were having the end of tour dinner, and there was a few of us had gathered in the Waldorf bar beforehand to have a few beers. And Kalps was there, and Kalps suddenly said, right, you guys, in this dinner tonight, I don't want any of you to speak before I do. And I thought, that's a bit strange. Anyhow, I didn't think any more of it. And Bob Parrish was the manager. And Bob, if he wasn't the chairman of the board at that stage, he very soon afterwards became chairman. And even before Bill spoke as the captain, Kalps got up and he let the board have it with both barrels. And I thought, this is interesting. So that was really the first time and to be fair, up to that point, I was just trying to hold my place in the team. That's the main thing that I was concentrating on. So anyhow, Kalps let him have both barrels. Then we go to India in 69. And one of the things that pissed us off was by that stage in India, there were starting to be some quite decent hotels, as in 5-star hotels. Tony Gregg always said to me afterwards when we were commentating together, he said, we went to India the year after you guys and we stayed in some terrific hotels. The problem was there were terrific hotels, but we didn't stay in them. And some of them were bad, very bad. So we're starting to get a bit pissed off with the attitude and so on. And we get to Guwahati, that was the worst of all. Guwahati was terrible. And Fred Bennett was our manager. And Fred got up. There was an official dinner in Guwahati, and Fred got up and he said, and Fred was a terrible speaker. He said, I'm looking forward to the day when we come back here for the first test match in Guwahati, and we're all looking forward to being here. And 16 voices from the room said, bullshit. Anyhow, it was in Guwahati. Bill called a players-only meeting. And he said, right, we're obviously, there's a lot of things that they're not happy about. You tell me what they are and I'll write them down and I'll send a letter to the board. So we did that. And I'm pretty sure it was Redder. Redder had found out that if one of us died on the tour, the wife or partner would have got, it was either $400 or $1,200. Let's say it was $1,200. Anyhow, it wasn't very much. And then another thing happened. Greg didn't get picked on that tour. And Bradman was interviewed back in Australia. And someone said to him, why didn't you pick Greg Chappell on the tour to India and South Africa? And Bradman said, well, because he's better off making runs in Shield cricket and not getting crook in India. And this, obviously, in those days, it would arrive, the news would arrive a week later, and we got this and we thought, so what? It doesn't give a shit if we all get crook. So there was that. And then there was the business of, we were totally sold up the river by the board in going India and then South Africa. The original tour was India, Pakistan.
That always seems weird to me because you must not have had a domestic season.
No, we didn't. And we didn't 66-7 either, but we only went to South Africa then, yeah. So what happened, it was India, Pakistan originally, which is not so bad because the conditions are pretty similar. But Pakistan, it was a guarantee system in those days. So the home team would pay a guarantee to the Australian Cricket Board. So it was a guaranteed fee. Didn't matter to the Australian Cricket Board how many people turned up at the ground. They were going to get that fee anyhow. But they wanted it paid in hard currency, which I assume was US dollars. Pakistan would only pay in their own currency. So the board said, well, we're not coming on that basis. So South Africa immediately jumped in and obviously, paid the board something. And they, oh, yeah, right, okay, we'll go to South Africa, which is bloody ridiculous. I mean, you go from 3.5 months of playing balls that are spinning this far and you're opening up and hitting off spinners through mid-wicket. You go straight to South Africa with nothing in between and you're playing on green-seeming pitches. And then to make it worse, the bloke who was our attack in South Africa in 66-7, Graham McKenzie, he got crook in India and they couldn't work out what was wrong with him. And so he was, he would bowl 2-3 overs and he was gone. And you'd see the poor bugger, he was sitting in the leg gully and he was holding his head in his hands and he just had nothing, and he dropped a hell of a lot in pace. So it was just a disgrace. So all of that built up. Then the South Africans being very, very keen on winning, they're pretty parochial. So they win the first couple and they now decide, we'll have a fifth test because we're only playing 4 originally. But this is how smart cricket administrators are. We've got 4 tests. We finished the 4th in Port Elizabeth, I think, was the last one. And then we play a first-class game in Cape Town and then another one in Bloemfontein after the test series is over. I mean, what genius has come up with that, especially when you've been away for 5.5 months anyhow. So, and this is where we were lucky. We got them over the barrel. So we're in Johannesburg, I think it was second test, Joburg, anyhow, whenever it was. So suddenly the South African Cricket Board want to have a 5th test. So Fred Bennett says, they want us to play a 5th test. And they want to pay, the board will pay you $200 extra, which was a test match fee in those days. But the mistake they made was that they had to extend the tour by 3 days to play this 5th test match. So that meant that we had to sign a new contract. And I said, when I found that out, I said to him, listen, we've got these bastards over a barrel. Won't happen very often, so let's make the most of it. And some of the guys wanted to play because I think pretty well everyone said, no, we want more than 200. So the Wanderers Club then offered to put in 300 extra for each player, so $500 for the test. So Fred's come back, very generous. We're going to give you $500. And before we went into that meeting, Bill had said, it's all in or all out. It's not going to be half and half. And I'd done a bit of canvassing before we went into the room, and I knew Graham McKenzie was going to vote no. Johnny Gleeson was somewhere, he didn't turn, but I knew he was going to vote no. Dougie Walters was going to vote no. I certainly was. And Brian Tabor had said to me, mate, I've just got a new job with the Rothmans Foundation, which is, sort of allied to the board. I'd prefer not to have to vote, but if it comes to the crunch, I'll vote no with you guys. So anyhow, we went in and Bill said, righto, what is it? And we, 4 or 5 of us said, no, we're not playing. And Bill just said straight away, okay, that's it. It's all in or all out. And some of them bitched, we could use the $500. For some reason or other, I had a checkbook in my back pocket and I threw it on the table. I said, if you need the money that bad, I'll write you a bloody check. So there was that. And then Bill, at the end of the meeting in Guwahati, I went to Bill and I said to him, mate, don't you just sign that letter on your own. I said, we all think this way. So let's get the 14 or 15, it might have been, 15 signatures on it, because you know what the board are like. If you just sign it on your own, they'll wait for you to fail a couple of times, you'll be gone. Yeah, sure, mate. And of course, he went home and he sent the letter.
Ian, I want to talk to you now about, and thank you for giving that story. It's a fascinating story. Can I talk about your captaincy now, which we've already spoken a little bit about, and what your philosophy was going into the role? So you've been made captain of Australia. I've heard the story about how you had written yourself a little note that I wanted to be captain one day. So you must have thought about it going in as far as the type of captain you were going to be. And I also want to give you because I remember the Pakistan series in 1972. I was very young, but studied it, and you made some really aggressive captaincy decisions around when you declared and keeping games alive when they looked like they were going to be draws. So it was a very refreshing style of captaincy. It clearly resonated with the public. Can you talk a bit about what your philosophies were and sort of what guided you around the cricket part of the strategy, but also the man management as well?
Mostly common sense, David. Most things in life, if you apply common sense, you won't go far wrong. The cricket side of it, I'd been getting a bit bored because we were playing a crap form of cricket, in my opinion. We were trying to get into a position where we couldn't lose before we really started to try and win. And I think that's a crap way to play the game. And in fact, I had a blue with Bill at Headingley in '68. Bill had a broken finger and didn't play, but he was sort of like the puppeteer. Yeah, Barry Chalmers was the captain, and Bill was up on the balcony and he was calling the shots. And the track was spinning a bit. I'm not sure that we would have actually won the game, but we didn't bowl the spinners until it was too late. And certainly we didn't bowl them until England couldn't win anymore. Anyhow, we got back in the dressing room and they had those brown-built metal lockers, and I threw my cap into the locker and I said, you can shove this up your arse, And I suddenly get this tap on my shoulder and I look around, it's William Morris. It's there. Oh, yeah. And he says, what's your problem? I said, mate, that was crap. Well, we didn't try to win the game. We could have won the game. Well, he said, we've done what we came here to do. And I said, what's that? He said, we're going home with the Ashes. I said, well, if that's what the Ashes does to a series, they should piss the Ashes off straight away. So, and playing under Les, and the games that I remember in particular were South Australia, New South Wales. Richie was, and this is my early days, Richie was captain of New South Wales, Les captain of South Australia, both very aggressive captains. And mate, every game we had, the fourth day, I said to somebody, I'm going to die of a bloody heart attack, because we always had these close finishes because one or other of them would set a target, and you'd have a run chase on the fourth day. But I came to the conclusion that because Les wanted 300 runs in the day. If we batted first, and bear in mind in those days it was 330 minutes for a Shield day, and if we were 2 for 280, Les would let us have it. If we were 7 for 305, he was happy. He wanted 300 runs in the day. And after fairly early on, I thought this is actually a damn good strategy for a number of reasons, but one of them being that you don't have to change, you don't have to go from second gear into fifth gear. If you're always looking to score pretty quickly, you might have to go from fourth into overdrive maybe on the last day, but it's not a big change. Whereas if you're just plodding along, then you've got this huge change to go from second gear to bloody overdrive, So I thought, geez, this is the way to play. And two other things. by trying to win, by letting your blokes know and the opposition know that you're trying to win the game from the first ball, you frighten the shit out of a lot of captains. Because bear in mind, in test matches in those days, you got a lot of draws. You don't have so many now because they make up time, but they didn't then. So there were quite a few captains that if they walked out there and after half an hour, they're thinking, Jesus, this mob they're looking to win the game right from the start. And they're thinking, Jesus, there's no draw here. We're either going to win or lose. And they would shit themselves if you put them in that position. And then the other thing that I learnt pretty quickly was that if you're always playing an interesting form of cricket, which is interesting not only for the public, but interesting for the blokes who are playing it, then you'll get the best out of the best players. And they're the ones, Greg and I have discussed it a lot. There's probably 5, good times 6 guys who are going to win or lose you the game. And the others sort of just add a bit here and there. But there's 5 or 6 guys who they're going to win or lose the game. And because the reason they're really good is because they're as competitive as hell. So if you make it interesting, that gets them going because, it gets their competitive juices going and you'll get the best out of them. So that really sort of sums up my philosophy. I think the game you're talking about was at the MCG.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, we'd won pretty comfortably in Adelaide. And Melbourne, the track was really flat. And we got to we were about
440, I think.
Yeah, well, but we were about 420 at drinks on the second morning. And Rodney had just he'd become the first Australian keeper to make a test 100 in Adelaide in the game before. And I sent a message out with drinks. I said, if you want another test 100, you got 20 minutes. And Rodney hit the first 4 balls for 4, and then Sarfraz bowled him a hand ahead, and he hit it straight up in the air and he got out. And he was really cranky when he came in. And I said to him, well, are you cranky because Sarfraz bowled you a beamer? He said, no, I'm pissed off because I didn't hit it for 6. So, as soon as he got out, I declared. But because, we could have gone on and got 6, probably 700. But it's a very, very hard way to win games of cricket. And they had a pretty decent batting side. We weren't going to get, we probably weren't going to beat them that way. So I declared. Then they batted. And as I say, it was a very flat track and they're piling them up. And I didn't mind that, but must have been taking the 3rd new ball, I think. And Intercubs still send them out, the number 9 and so, and what was his name? I'll think of his name in a minute. He was a pretty decent seamer, actually. He's come striding down the walkway coming out to the wicket. You see in there? I don't know how many in front they are at this stage, but probably 90 or 100, I don't know. And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, Indy, I've tried to give you a clue that I want to have a game of cricket here. So I went to Dennis. I said, Dennis, you just run in and every ball is a bouncer until I tell you to stop or the umpire speaks to you. And I said, if the umpire speaks to you, you refer him to me. So Dennis bowled 3 in a row at, what was his name? Anyhow, I'll think of it in a minute. And Indy's come running down, waving his arms, and they've declared. And then we got 290. And, I was pretty bored with the batting was pretty easy on that track. And I wanted John Benno in the side to go to the West Indies as the spare batsman. So I said to JB, do you want to bat at 3? And he said, I'd like to, but you're the number 3. I said, no, mate, if you want it, you've got it. And he got 120 because they dropped him for the Sydney Test. So I thought if he can get a score, it'll force their hand a bit, which he did. He got 127. Then that night, the 4th night, so we've set him about 290 to get. And Tomo, we're having a beer, and Tomo comes to me and says, mate, he says, I won't be able to bowl tomorrow. I said, Jesus, why? What's happened, Because I'm sort of thinking he's going to be pretty important the next day. Because it was just starting to stay down a little bit, and his pace, if one's up here and one's down there, it's not much fun. I said, why? What's the problem? He said, mate, he said, I got a broken bone in my foot. I said, shit, when did that happen? He said, I came into the test with it. And I said, Christ almighty, why'd you do that? He said, I wanted to play, mate. I didn't want to pull out. And as you got the scorecard there, he got none for 110. And anyhow, we finished up winning. I think we bowled him out for about 200, I think. We won
200, yeah.
We won by about 90. But that night we were sitting around having a beer, and Redder said to me, he said, oh, we found a good one today, or this game. And I said, yeah, we sure did, mate. He said, yeah, that Max Walker, he's going to be a good one. I said, Red, you can go down the beach and you can find umpteen medium fast bowlers. I said, but how many blokes of Tomo's pace can you find? Not too many of them around, mate. I said, you can take Max Walker. I'll take Jeff Thompson anytime, thanks. And anyhow, I think we argued about it for a while, but I think I was proved right.
It was a fascinating test in Sydney, the next one as well. Ian, I just wanted to talk to you about a few of the characters that you played with and against. And if you could give me sort of, as I run through these, about a dozen of them, if you can give me sort of one sentence answers, that would be great. Doug Walters?
I've often said I would hate to tour without Doug Walters, and not just because he was a match winner, but because he had that ability to keep the dressing room loose. He would drive you to the point where you either wanted to punch him on the nose or you'd laugh. And fortunately, most cricketers aren't fighters, so we'd laugh. But he was a match winner, mate. How many guys other than Bradman made 3 Test centuries in a session? Amazing player.
And he obviously he would be one of those match winners you talked about a few moments ago. Greg Chappell?
Greg was the best. He was the mentally strongest batsman that I played with. He wasn't the best batsman that I played with, but he was best mentally organised, I think is the way I described him. He found a way to organise himself mentally and to control his mind so he was doing what he wanted to do more often than what the bowlers wanted him to do. I remember asking him after he announced his retirement and needing 69 to beat Bradman in Sydney, and he got 180. And I said to him, and I pretty well knew why he did it, but I said to him, why did you announce your retirement before the test? And he said, mate, I used to be able to drag up my concentration anytime I wanted to, but he said in the last couple of years, I just couldn't do it. I could do it occasionally, but not all the time. And I thought the only way I've got a chance of doing it this time is if I announce my retirement, and then I know I've only got one chance to get to 69 runs.
Dennis Lilly?
Well, you just talked about that Sydney test. I'll tell you a story about Dennis Lilly that will sum him up in that actual match. Dennis was having trouble with his back, and he always says that his back finally went in the Sydney test because he was trying to kill me at first slip, because he ran in and bowled a leg break. And at the end of the over, I went to him, I said, mate, I've got 4 leg spinners in this side. If I need leg breaks bowled, I'll get one of them to bowl them. And he reckons he was trying to kill me at first slip after that, and his back went. Anyhow, we were leading by about 80, and we were 7 down. And Dennis came to me and he said, I'm going to bowl in the second innings. I said, mate, if we had 4 Dennis Lillys, we couldn't win this game. So I said, don't ruin your back. And he wasn't happy about it, but anyhow, off he went. Then Watkins and Massey put on about 80, and we set him 156. And he then, at the end of that partnership, he came to me and he said, I'm going to bowl now. And I said, that's fine, mate, because we can win now. Anyhow, he bowled 7 overs and he broke the stump. Now, it wasn't because he was bowling quick. It must have been a faulty stump, but I reckon it got us 3 wickets in the Pakistan dressing room. Nazim Al-Ghani was the opening batsman, hit the middle of the stump and snapped it in 2. Anyhow, he'd bowled 7 overs. I went to him and I said, mate, that's fantastic. Ross Edwards had stood on his ear and caught Sadiq, and Sadiq was the best player. He played Dennis Lilly better than anyone else I saw. And so we had him about 3 down. And I said to him, mate, that's fantastic. I said, you've done your job. We can win it from here. Have a rest. He said, no, mate. He said, if you take me off now, I won't be able to come back. He said, but if I keep going while I'm warm, I can keep going. He said, I'm only bowling with my arm, so let me keep going. If you look up his figures, he bowled 21 overs on the trot and he got 3 for something. Max got 6 for 15. Dennis got 3. But, that was Dennis Lilly. The thing I've always said about Dennis was he was a captain's dream and a batsman's nightmare. You had to overcome, first of all, you had to overcome his ability, which wasn't an easy thing to do. But if you got to a point where you were thinking that you might have him covered there, you then had to overcome his iron will. And that was some hell of a job.
Yeah, extraordinary career. Jeff Thompson?
Tomo, when Greggy got the 100 in Brisbane in the first test, 74-5. Well, sorry, I'll go back before that. So I'd seen Tomo in that test in Melbourne, and he got none for 110, but you could see how quick he was. And then New South Wales didn't play him. He went up to Queensland. So Queensland played Western Australia in the game at the Gabba before the test. So I fly into Brisbane, get to the hotel, and straight on the phone, I ring Rodney Marsh up and I said, Rodney, have you got beer in your fridge? Which was a stupid bloody question. Yes, of course I have. So I go up, I have a beer. I said, what's Thompson like, mate? Jesus Christ. He said, is he bloody quick? He said, I was a bit lucky being a left-hander. He said, he angles across me. And he said, I was able to get a few over the top of slips and I got 50. He said, but he worked out pretty quickly what I was doing. And he went a bit wider and he had one coming back at me from just outside the leg stump. And he said, it hit the middle of the handle of the bat. Thank Christ. He said, otherwise I'm not here talking to you. He's the most lethal bowler that I've seen, played against and seen. His ability, particularly for the 2.5 years before he busted his shoulder, his ability to get the ball to throat height, which is ideal height for hook and pull shot, but it wasn't short enough to play those shots. Think about this for a second. At the Wacker ground, as it was before they changed the dimensions a bit, but they didn't change them a lot. He bowled, I think, to Keith Fletcher. He bowled a ball that bounced in the middle of the Wacker pitch, and its next bounce had half volleyed the sight board. Now, you think about that. That's got to be minimum 80 yards. How do you do that? It's impossible. You cannot bowl a cricket ball that does that, but he did it. I mean, he just had this. His description of his action is absolutely spot on. Somebody said to him, how would you describe your action, Tomo? He said, mate, he said, I just shuffle up and go wang. But he went wang at about 100 miles an hour. But that's Tomo. Tomo's another one who a lot of people think Tomo's, not the smartest bloke around. He's quite smart and he knew what the hell he was doing when he was bowling.
Gary Sobers?
Sobers the best cricketer I've ever played with or against. There were a few others. Sobers is the best I've seen. Graham Pollock wasn't far away. Rowan Canai was a terrific player. Viv Richards, Barry Richards. Sonny's got to rank up there, not for stroke playing, but, to open the batting and score the runs that he did as a short little guy from Indian slow pitches against the West Indies pace bowlers. But Gary's not only the best cricketer I've ever seen, he's the best batsman I've ever seen. Yeah. Forget about all the other things that he did. I mean, he played 3 seasons for South Australia. He virtually took 50 wickets each, and we're talking 8 matches. The first year, he only played 7 because he had to go back to the Caribbean. First year, he got 500-odd runs, 250 of them in one innings against New South Wales. The next 2 seasons, he got 1,000 runs each season and got 50 wickets. I mean, I sat down and worked it out one day. He averaged more than 100 runs per Shield game that he played, and he averaged 6 wickets per match. And then there's the bloke, he was a champion bloke. In 63-4, South Australia were playing South Africa at the Adelaide Oval. And Les Favell was a stickler for you wearing the South Australian cap. I remember Neil Hawke, when he got picked in the test side, ran out onto the field with his Australian cap on, and Les said, "Pass off, Hawkey, and get your South Australian cap." Anyhow, we're playing South Africa. Les wins the toss, comes back in the dressing room. "What are we doing, Skip?" "We're batting." And Gary says, "Hey, Skip, all right if I wear the West Indies cap when I'm batting today?" And he hardly ever wore a cap. I don't know, you probably wouldn't have ever seen him with a cap on, but it was like a jockey's cap. The peak used to stick sort of straight up. And as I say, he hardly ever wore it. Anyhow, Les thought for a moment and he said, "Yeah, that's fine, Gary." So he puts on the West Indies cap. He and Ian McLaughlin belt the hell out of South Africa. Gary gets 150, Macca gets 130 odd. Anyhow, so that's 63-4. 1991, I'm in Barbados doing some commentary, and I'm having a few beers with Sobey at the Barbados Beach Bar. And I said to him, "Sobey, why did you ask Les if he could wear the West Indies cap that day against the South Africans?" And his answer was absolutely beautiful. And there was no prejudice in Gary at all. And Gary, he just looked at me, he said, "Ian, at that stage, the South Africans had never seen a West Indies cap." And he said, "I thought it was time they had a good long look at one."
What a beautiful story. Yeah, that's a great story. You mentioned Ray Illingworth. He was a guy I was going to ask you about because I know you enjoyed his captaincy.
Yeah, I thought Illy was a damn good captain. You could have a game of cricket with Illy. He was always looking to win the game and try and have a win. I mean, you set out trying to win the game from ball number one, but there might be a point where you realise we can't win this. Well, then you've got to go for the second option, which is to draw. But Illy made it clear, and that's what the good captains do. They make it clear, I'm here to have a game of cricket. Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose here. And so, as I said to you before, I learnt quite a lot about captaincy from Illy. I enjoyed captaining him against him. He was tough, very tough Yorkshireman, but I enjoyed his company, and I enjoyed captaining against him.
Jeff Boycott?
Most selfish cricketer I've ever come across by a mile. In 70-71, Rodney Marsh's first series as a wicketkeeper. And in those days at the Adelaide Oval, we used to get 12 of the big bottles of beer, so one for each player. So it's our turn to go into the England dressing room. I walk in and I look over in the corner and I see Marsh talking to Boycott. And I thought, Jesus, that's a strange combination. And Rodney's got his big bottle of beer with him, you see. And I turned away and then I thought, Jesus Christ, our wicketkeeper's pretty smart. He's gone over and stood next to a non-drinker so he doesn't have to share his beer. I thought, Jesus Christ, he's pretty smart, this bloke. So anyhow, we get back in the Australian room and I said to him, "Hey, Rodney, you and Boycott, that's a strange combo." He said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "But you'll be seeing a lot more of it." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I went over there and we chatted for about 2 minutes and I ran out of conversation with him. And I said to him, "Oh, mate, Hampster's playing well," being Jack Hampshire who's also from Yorkshire. I said, "Hampster's playing well." "Oh, aye, he is." He said, "But you boogers bowling wrong line to him." And I said, "Well, what line should we be bowling?" And he said, he told me. And he said, "So every time I go in their room, I'm going to be with Boycott and I'm going to throw a different name out each time." Mate, he was a shocker.
I haven't heard that story. That's a beauty.
Yeah, no, he was a shocker.
What about Rodney Marsh?
Well, he'd be my best mate from the cricketing days. You get pretty close when you're away for like an England tour was about 5.5 months. So you get pretty close with guys, and we had a lot in common. I always used to say to Rodney, Graham, as in Marsh, and Greg, as in my brother, are very similar. I said to Rodney, they both travel with the handbrake on. You know, they'll be in the bar, they'll have a couple of beers, and then they'll disappear, come back an hour later and have another couple, and then but I said, you and I, we don't see any red lights. You know, once we get going, it's all green lights. And, you know, we've had a hell of a lot of fun together. I learnt a lot about captaincy from Rodney, and this is a good lesson for anybody who wants, as a leader, to have yes men around him. Think again, because we're playing at Old Trafford in '72, and I've captained South Australia 5 times, I reckon, before I captained Australia. And the modus operandi at the Adelaide Oval was Hammond and McCarthy with the new ball, and then I'd go straight to Mallet and Jenner with because they were 2 really good spinners. Greg bitched one day when I bowled him for 4 overs and took him off. And he said, how do you expect me to get wickets in 4 overs? I said, well, you better find a way, mate, because you're in this team to get hundreds, and I'm not going to bowl you for any long spells and detract from your batting. And I said, and by the way, if you do get a wicket, you'll be off anyhow, and one of the good bowlers will be back on, which didn't go down all that well. Anyhow, so we're playing at Old Trafford in '72, and it is a seam's paradise, seaming everywhere. I don't think I've ever played on a track that seamed as much as that one did for about 3.5 days. Anyhow, I had Inverarity bowling at one end and Gleeson bowling at the other end, so 2 spinners on. And I wasn't fielding at first slip in the early days of captaincy when the spinners were on, because I thought, you know, I might have a lapse in concentration. So Stacky was at first slip. I was at mid-wicket. So I'm crossing over in between overs, and Marsh goes, he says, you're a fucking idiot. And I said, what, something I said to you in the bar last night? No, he said, this is the greatest seamer's paradise. And he said, you've got a bloody spinner bowling at each end. He said, get him off and get any seamer. Doesn't matter who he is, get any seamer on. And I said, well, I will remind you, Rodney, that one of those spinners has just got Jeff Boycott out. But it was a good lesson, because I went away and I thought about it, and I thought, Ian, you're not playing every game at the Adelaide Oval. You know, you've got to your tactics have got to be designed to fit the conditions, not just, this is the formula for Adelaide Oval and that's for my formula wherever we go. So it was a good lesson. And as I say, anybody who's thinking that leadership and having a whole lot of yes men around them is a good idea, think again, because it'll only lead you into trouble. And if you've got, I always found that the larrikins were the best in your team, because they were always the guys who were the last ones to think you couldn't win. They would, if they saw something they thought was bullshit, they'd tell you. And as I say, I learned a lot about captaincy from being told I was a bloody idiot by the players, you know. But Rodney, and you know, if you look through the history of the game of cricket, not just Australian teams, but all teams, you look at the really good teams, they've all got not only a good wicketkeeper, but a smart wicketkeeper, because you can get so much information from your wicketkeeper. So to be standing at first slip and have your wicketkeeper on your left, and in my case, I had the vice captain on my right all the time, because Stacky was there originally and then Greg. So, you know, there's a hell of a lot of information I'm getting.
Not about engine room. Yeah.
Yeah. While you're just standing there talking in between balls.
Ian, I just, I know I've got to let you go in a moment, but I do want to just reference quickly World Series cricket. We won't go into much detail, but I mean, it was an incredibly brave move by Kerry Packer and the people that organised it. Did you enjoy it? I mean, I know you have said in the past that you love the competitive nature of it, and it's probably some of the most competitive cricket you ever played. But it was a massive risk to do it. Probably not so much for you because you had retired from Test cricket. You were actually playing at North Melbourne at the time. But was it? Do you look back on it as a very good time of your life?
Yeah, I mean, probably more when I look back on it. At the time, it was a bloody battle because it wasn't some of the toughest cricket, it was the toughest cricket that I've ever played.
Yeah.
And just to give you an example, when you were playing for Australia, if you failed in a test match, you went back and you probably played a shield game. And sometimes you'd even go back and play a club game. So if you were struggling a bit for form, you might go back into a club game and get 100 in a club game. Now, okay, it's not the same bowling, but that's all you need to get you going again. Or you might go back into a shield game and get 100. It gets you going again. How did you get going again in World Series cricket? Because you played Roberts, Holding, Garner and Croft and you failed. And then the next game you'd play bloody LaRue, Imran Khan, bloody John Snow, Derek Underwood, and you fail again. And then the next game you're playing bloody Roberts, Holding, Garner and Croft again. And so how the hell, it was very, very difficult to get back into form. It was easily the toughest form of cricket. You were talking about leadership before. And a big part of leadership is knowing your players, getting to know them. And this is why, I've always been a great one for wanting players to stick around for an hour after play. So one, I can get to know them, and two, they can get to know everyone. And you also get to know the opposition a bit. But it's crucial that you know your players and what gets them going. Some blokes you got to pat them on the back, other blokes you kick them up the arse. And to give you an example, we're in the old Melbourne at the end of the first season of World Series cricket. And we were down in what our manager, Jeff Forsyth, used to call the noise room, because it had a jukebox downstairs in the old Melbourne there. So we're down at the end of the season, end of the tour, and we're having a drink and listening to music. And Dennis comes over and he puts his hand out. And I can't remember what he said, but it sounded like a retirement speech to me, you see. And at the end of it, he said, "Now shake my hand." And I said, "I don't shake the hands of medium pacers, only fast bowlers." And I had a pretty fair idea what would be coming. And he's gone whack. And he's punched me in the guts, you see. He put his hand out and he said, "Now shake me by the hand." And I said, "I told you, mate, only fast bowlers, not medium pacers." Whack. 3 times he's whacked me. And obviously the last 2 I was a bit better prepared for. And after the third one, he's whacked me and he said, "Well, fuck you." He said, "I'll be back next year and I'll take more wickets than anyone else in World Series cricket." And guess what he did? He took more than anyone else. Dennis was the easiest guy in the world to motivate. All you had to do was say, "Oh, Dennis, look, no Western Australians ever taken 5 wickets at the SCG on a Friday in December." Well, we'll fucking see about that, That's all you had to, all you had to do with Dennis. Yeah.
And is there anybody that you had to go the other way, that didn't respond to confrontation?
I was pretty lucky, probably because of my personality, that they were a pretty tough bunch. Mule Francis was pretty soft. In general, I've always said one of the great advantages I had as a captain was the fact that I was a drinker. Because if you're a drinker, you spend time in bars dealing with human beings, and you get all the sob stories and all the funny stories, and you learn how to deal with people in a bar, and particularly when they've had a few drinks. And sometimes you can get an indication of what a guy's like when he's had a few drinks, and that might give you a bit of a clue to how you got to handle him or what his temperament is. I was probably pretty lucky in that most of them were kick up the bum rather than a pat on the back.
So, Ian, I'll ask you a couple more questions. I'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time so far.
No problem.
I'll move away from cricket now, because there's a side to you that the listeners probably don't know that I've seen a little bit of. So your love of music. You chat about that, because it is you do love your music. I've been to a jazz bar with you. You're pretty keen on it. It's played a pretty significant part of your life, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, that's something, again, I can thank my parents for, because I remember very early days, they took me to Oklahoma. Um, and in 1952, when the games were on in Helsinki, Martin had what they called a radiogram in those days. He had it made up so we could listen to the Olympics from Helsinki, and it had a turntable on it. So there was always, Martin was Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. They were his two favourites. Gene was sort of a Bing Crosby. It was interesting because when I went to Prince Alfred College, which would have been, where are we, 1956, I think, was the first year I went there. Yeah, that'd be about right. Yeah. So rock and roll just started. And I was very much, for a long time, I was very much rock and roll because, I was 13 years old when rock and roll really kicked off. So we'd get it, and the drive from Glenelg to Prince Alfred College is about 10 miles, I suppose. It was on the other side of the city. And if I got in the car first, I'd whoomp onto the rock and roll station, you see. And if Martin got in the car first, we'd get bloody Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald or Bing Crosby, that we'd get that station. And I remember I've got it on the bloody rock and roll, and Martin's driving on. He says, "Turn that off. That's not bloody music. That's shit. That's just noise, that shit." And anyhow, many, many years later, Manda's probably in her 20s. That's my daughter. And I thought I should just listen to a bit of her music and see if I like it or whatever. See, I said, "Right, Amanda, play me some of your music." See, so she puts a bit on, and it goes for about 2 minutes. I said, "Amanda, that's not bloody music." I said, "That shit's noise." And I thought, Jesus Christ, I'm becoming a father. But I think music and humour. I don't know where you'd be in life without those two things. I can remember a mate of mine at Prince Alfred College, Ivan Simmons, who's gone on to be a skin specialist. He and his father Eric, they took me to watch George Wallace. What was it, vaudeville in those days? We went to the theatre. It was a theatre just near the town hall in Adelaide. And I'll never forget, George Wallace was on. I got a feeling Mo might have been on as well, Roy Ream. But, and those, like, I can remember the Mo McCackey, was it McCackey Mansions and so on the radio. We used to listen to that. So once again, I thank my parents for giving me an interest in music, and then Barbara's sort of expanded it a bit, or a lot, to the point where I sort of hit the wall a bit with rock and roll, probably about the end of, Billy Joel, Elton John, that sort of time. After that, the music, I don't know, I sort of didn't like it so much. So I went more to country then, because a lot of the country, like Jerry Lee Lewis, for instance, was rock and roll and country. So I knew a lot of those guys. So I went country. And then, when I met Barbara, she was a big Clapton fan. And I obviously knew of Clapton, but she was a really serious fan. And through listening to Clapton and so on, then I got into the blues, and we're both very much blues, but also Barbara will listen to a bit of classical music from time to time. And I suddenly found that could be quite soothing. And I found, when I was away commentating in the morning, you're getting ready for, to go to the ground and that. And some of the crap that's spoken on the radio used to drive me mad. So I found ABC Classical FM. And so they were just playing, and I found that quite calming. And then you'd get a news bulletin, so you'd hear the news, which is all I really wanted, that and a bit of calming music. So, my musical appreciation has expanded over the years.
And who's the comedian that gave you the biggest belly laugh? Because I know you like your comedians as well.
Yeah. somebody sent me a bloody. I had a mate, Lynn Marks, who played for New South Wales and South Australia, and he was a huge Goons fan, particularly Spike Milligan. And somebody sent me a clip of Spike Milligan's the other day, and he's being interviewed, and he's talking about being in the army. And he said, the medical officer called me in, and he said, Milligan, take your clothes off. And I said to him, shouldn't you take me out to dinner first? Which is, I mean, that encapsulates Spike to me. I mean, very simple but bloody funny. There's a lot of comedians. I was very saddened to hear what happened with Bill Cosby, because I was a big Cosby fan, but I sort of went off him after what happened in recent years. But there's a program called Shameless, or it's not on anymore, the UK version, not the US version. As usual, the Yanks bugger up a good English comedy. But Shameless is, I mean, if you don't like swearing, don't watch it, because there's a lot of swearing. But it just reminded me of when I went to play in the Lancashire League in 1963. It was just, it's set just outside Manchester. Frank Gallagher is the main character, and he delivers a soliloquy in each program. I'll send you a link that I sent to a couple of mates just recently. It'll crack you up. Oh, I think it'll crack you up. It's bloody funny.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Anybody? There's another guy called Peter Kay, who is also a Lancastrian, and I guess, I spent 6 months living in just out of.
You played for Lancaster, didn't you?
Yeah, I played for Ramsbottom. Yeah. So, and I really, I mean, it was crap weather, really terrible weather, and you realise why they need a good sense of humour with that sort of weather. But they have got a terrific sense of humour. And there's a guy called Peter Kay. He's an amazing bloke. He was actually the warmer-upper on the Parkinson show. And so he would get the audience warmed up. And Parky suddenly one day thought, I don't know whether somebody didn't turn up or whatever, or he just decided, this guy's so good, I've got to get him on the show. And he's taken off. He's huge. He's a huge name in English comedy. Very, very funny man, Peter Kay.
I'll admit to watching a YouTube the other night with Robin Williams being interviewed by Michael Parkinson. It was the funniest 10, 15 minutes I've ever had. He was a funny man too. He
was, yeah. I couldn't understand him a lot of the time. That was
he went so quick. He was on obviously something, but he was
yeah. Well, you've got to. There was a thing, 60 Minutes in America did it, and they had, or it might have even been 60 Minutes here, but it was Billy Crystal and Robin Williams together. Mate, it is an absolute circus, because I'm a huge fan.
And then you throw Billy Connolly in that as well, which I've seen.
Billy Connolly, yeah.
Okay, my last question, and I do want you to talk about this, because you have become, well, maybe you've always had it, but socially aware, conscious, whatever the term might be. And I think it's an enduring feature that I've found in you over the years, that you talked a little bit earlier about justice, but it's in a world where there's a lot of self-interest. I think your awareness now of what's happening in the world, how we're being managed in the world, and some of the, I guess, the tough plight that other humanitarians are seeing, it's a rare gift you've got, Ian. I just wonder whether you wanted to talk about why you've had this social conscience and why you chose to do something about it.
Well, I've been lucky to have, and I think I said this when I was inducted into the the Australian Hall of Fame, the Cricket Hall of Fame. I've been lucky to have three very strong women in my life. Obviously, my mother, and that's where I get a lot of the social justice from, and the fairness is from Jean. And obviously, Barbara Ann is a very strong person, and Manda, my daughter, in her own quiet way, is a very strong-willed person. But so two things, I got it from Jean. She always used to get very pissed off if if some underdog was getting hammered. And then the thing that really got me started was the Tampa crisis. That really got up my nose. I was really cranky. And one night I'm in the house we used to have downstairs was my office, and we had a big television set down there, and I'm watching, and the Tampa crisis is going on, and I'm really getting the shits, and I'm yelling at the television set. And Barbara Ann came down with my dinner, and she said, "You realise that bad things happen when good people do nothing." And that's when I thought, well, she's right. I mean, me yelling at the television set isn't going to solve too many problems. So I think at that stage I just started with Australia for UNHCR. I got a fax. Oh, that's right. I got a message on the answer phone. Ring Stuart McGill on this number. And I'm thinking, why does Stewie McGill want me to ring him? I can't help him much with bowling, and I certainly can't help him with his batting. Anyhow, I ring this guy, and it was Stuart McGill from an advertising agency, and they were sending out a letter. I think it was for Afghani refugees, and Australia for UNHCR were trying to raise money for these refugees. And he said, "Would you be prepared to sign a letter? We've got a letter here. I'll send it to you, and if you're happy with it, make any changes you want. But if you're happy with it, just sign it, and we'll send it out to our clients, the people that donate." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." So I did that, and they rang back and said, "Oh, it went pretty well." And I then rang Naomi Steer from Australia for UNHCR, and I said, "Naomi, it's all well and good to just sign a letter and send it out, but I'd like to do a bit more." So she then got me involved, and I became an ambassador, which I still am with them. And then I think around about the Tampa crisis, I got a call from Mike Coward, the journalist, sports journalist, and he said, "We've got a thing called Adjust Australia, and we'd like you to come on board. We've got a whole lot of patrons, and we'd like you to be one of them." And I said to him, "Yeah, he told me what they were trying to do, and I said, "Yeah, I'm happy to do it." I said, "But I'll just ring Naomi, if you don't mind, and clear it with her. Just make sure it doesn't cut across anything she's doing." I'll never forget her answer. I rang Naomi up and told her what I was after, and she said, "Ian, that's fine." She said, "I'll come and visit you in jail," because obviously she was seeing Adjust Australia as a out on the streets marching with signs and so on. So that's really where I got, I started to really get involved. I'm not sure where the Aboriginal cricket team, I can't remember the sort of time frame of that, but it always annoyed me, because I thought the Aboriginal team that went to England in 1868 really paved the way for every Australian team that came after it. And, you think about Aborigines from Western Victoria going on a bloody boat trip for whatever it took, 3 months or whatever it was, and then go to England where it's cold and wet. And, it was just a remarkable performance. And anyhow, I thought we should do something about it. And I spoke to the board about, they should have numbers at least. You've got numbers for every test player. They should have a number. And of course it came back, "Oh, well, what are we going to do? We can't where are we going to fit them in?" And then when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, there were 3 things going through my mind to say. One, it must have been the first Desert Storm. I was going to say, fighting wars is just bloody ridiculous. Why are we still fighting war? That was going to be one. The second thing was, isn't it time Richie Benaud was in the Hall of Fame? And of course, Richie was hosting the show. And I knew that he'd said he wouldn't go in the Hall of Fame until he stopped hosting the show. Yeah. And the third thing was, it's about time the Aboriginal cricketers were recognised. Anyhow, I came down, in the end, I decided I'd go with the Aboriginal cricketers. And I remember, I mentioned it, I spoke about it at my induction, and I thought, that'll, I'll cop a bit of flack for this. I was absolutely staggered the next day going to the airport. People stopped me in the airport and said, that was fantastic last night, what you said. It got such an amazing reaction. And the other reaction was from Benno. We were having a drink after the induction ceremony, and I told Richie the three things that I was thinking about. And I said, in the end, I came down on the side of the Aboriginals into the Hall of Fame, and he had a sip of his white wine. He said, a very wise decision, Ian. Typical Benno.
Ian, thank you so much for your time. We're going to finish it there, but that has been one of the most fascinating hour and a half I've ever spent. You're so generous with the stories you've given and how open you've been with me, and I appreciate you doing this, and as always, appreciate your friendship.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. Enjoyed it.
All the best. Thanks, Ian.